Yo, what up? I'm Zach, aka the F&IT guy, and today we're going to dive into some threat modeling. So what is threat modeling? Threat modeling is the process of identifying threats, vulnerabilities, and then prioritizing the implementation of controls to reduce the risk that you face by those threats and vulnerabilities. Whenever we start threat modeling, there are a couple of questions that we have to ask ourselves. So first we ask, what do I want to protect? Number two, who or what do we want to protect it from? Number three, how bad are the consequences if you fail? Four, how likely is it that you'll need to protect it? And five, how much trouble are you willing to go through to prevent the consequences of failure to protect whatever this asset is that we're discussing? And then after we have the answers to those questions, we shift into a more practical focus. First, we examine question number one. What do we want to protect, or what do we need to protect? In this particular case, we're talking about protecting our online identity and our online presence. This includes accounts, devices, applications, files, all sorts of things. So if we decide that we're trying to protect our online life, our online presence, then we have to start out with an inventory. We list out all of our accounts, we list out all of our applications, all of our devices, and then we can begin to move forward. If we're not certain of all the assets that we have, all the accounts, devices, applications, and critical information, then we're not going to be able to implement controls to prevent threats from exploiting vulnerabilities. And as we do our asset inventory, we want to categorize things based on the level of impact of a compromise. So for instance, your card information might be in a higher category than your Netflix account. Documents that contain personally identifiable information might have greater consequences if exposed. After we've categorized these things, then we move on to a threat inventory. And here we're trying to answer the question, who or what are we trying to protect our assets from? So for instance, if you're a journalist and you live under an oppressive regime, your threat is going to have much more resources than some random guy who's behind a computer sending out malware to people through phishing emails. And since you have more to lose, you're going to be willing to go through much greater lengths to protect yourself. And we have to remember as we move forward with threat modeling, the idea is that we want to balance confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So for instance, if I make my computer super strong and penetrable, the most secure computer out there, that's really cool. But if it's so secure that I can barely use it, then that's a problem. So we want to find balance as we navigate through our threat model and our measures to mitigate risk. And as we're identifying threats, this is also a good time to identify the most likely attack vectors that our threats are going to use. If we understand the attack vectors that the enemy or the adversary is going to use, then we'll be in a much better position to assess and prioritize our vulnerabilities. Common attack vectors include social engineering attempts like phishing, compromised or weak credentials, and unpatched vulnerabilities. So this is important for us to know as we really narrow down the things that we want to start with first, particularly on the things that are in a higher security category than others. Then we move on to assessing vulnerabilities. So there are a couple different things that you want to look at here, right? You want to look at your devices, you want to look at your applications, accounts, critical information that you want to protect, and then you move down that list and then you identify what are common vulnerabilities, and we use the knowledge of common attack vectors to really narrow down where our focus is going to be. So for accounts, you might have weak credentials. Your credentials could already be compromised. This is especially troubling if you reuse your passwords for the majority of your accounts, and you may not have multi-factor authentication enabled. For devices, all the same things that we listed for accounts are relevant here. In addition to that, you might have a weak baseline configuration, unnecessary services enabled, or other various issues. The information that's really important to you may not be backed up, it may not be encrypted. All these things would count as vulnerabilities. And I'd like to remind you that no matter how many YouTube videos you watch on vulnerabilities, it's very difficult to find a one-size-fits-all solution. And that's where security technical implementation guides, or STIGs, come in. And they give you specific guidance for your devices or applications on how to harden them and make them so that vulnerabilities aren't as easily exploited. And as we're examining our vulnerabilities, we want to keep in mind that an important goal that we ought to have is to reduce our attack surface. Attack surface can be defined as all the points of entry into your system. You can think of attack surface like your home. You have windows, doors, and other places that a thief could break into. And to avoid this, we put locks on our doors, locks on our windows. If someone who is suspicious knocks on our door, generally we don't answer. These are controls that we put in place to mitigate risk and reduce our attack surface. And so now that we've identified our threats, our vulnerabilities, we have in front of us the risks that need to be dealt with. So we examine our risks and then we implement controls to mitigate and reduce risk. And I've created a handy dandy Excel spreadsheet that will cover some of these common attack vectors and ways to fix vulnerabilities and mitigate risk. Link will be in the description, and you can use this to inventory your assets, identify threats, vulnerabilities, and then track the implementation of the controls that you put in place to mitigate the risk. I encourage you to check out that sheet. Thanks for watching. Like the video, subscribe, and turn on alerts, and I look forward to hanging out with you guys again. Bye.